Thank you, everybody, for coming today to the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy, and Ethics. Meeting number 100, pursuant to Standing Order 1083H7, study of breach of personal information involving Cambridge Analytica and Facebook. And with us today is Kevin Chan, Global Director, Head of Policy, Facebook Canada. And via teleconference, Robert Sherman, Deputy Chief Privacy Officer in California. And I just would like to start off with Mr. Chan. I think we were, and myself as chair, were disappointed that Mr. Zuckerberg declined our request. And I'd say we don't take that lightly, but we appreciate you being here today. Mr. Chan.
Thank you very much. And again, yes, our CEO does apologize that he could not be here today in person with the committee. And I am here with my colleague Rob Sherman on his behalf. So thank you for that note, sir. Mr. Chair and members of the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy, and Ethics, thank you for the invitation to appear before you today. My name is Kevin Chan, and I am the Head of Public Policy for Facebook Canada. I am joined via video conference by my colleague Rob Sherman, Facebook's Deputy Chief Privacy Officer. Before I start, I want to acknowledge our offer earlier this week to pre-brief committee members on the Cambridge Analytica situation. Over the past few weeks, we have made a large volume of announcements on which we did do pre-briefs to U.S. lawmakers prior to last week's congressional hearings. We want to extend that same offer as a courtesy to members of this committee. I regret that our intentions may have been unclear. I want to begin by sharing that while we do not yet have all of the facts surrounding the situation with Cambridge Analytica, what is alleged to have occurred is a huge breach of trust to our users, and for that, we are very sorry. Given the scale of our service, with more than 23 million Canadians using Facebook every month and more than 2 billion people globally, we recognize the role we play in people's lives and the need to take greater responsibility for that.
There is no doubt that the events over the past weeks surrounding the protection of data are of concern to all of us. With some time to reflect, it was clear that Facebook had not invested enough in the security of our platform, and we are responsible for that. We have a duty of extreme vigilance, and we will do everything possible to make sure we correct the situation so that this does not recur.
A few weeks have taught us some important lessons. Trust in our service is at the core of what we do at Facebook. As our CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, recently said, we have a responsibility to protect your data, and if we can't, then we don't deserve to serve you. As Facebook has grown, people have gotten powerful tools to stay connected to those they care about, make their voices heard, and build communities and businesses. But it's clear now that we didn't do enough to prevent these tools from being used for harm as well. We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility, and that was a mistake. In Canada and around the world, we know we have a lot of work to do, and this is just the beginning. We are, of course, also fully cooperating with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada as it conducts its investigation into the matter. I would like to turn now to my colleague Rob Sherman, who can take you through some of the facts as we know them today and the actions we are taking to prevent abuse from happening on our platform going forward.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you to the committee for having me here today. As Kevin mentioned, I'm Facebook's Deputy Chief Privacy Officer. I want to apologize for not being able to join today's committee hearing in person. I'm hosting a summit today in California with many leading privacy experts, which had been scheduled for some time. But I appreciate the committee's attention to this important matter, and we appreciate the opportunity to provide information to support your study. I'd like to spend just a few minutes on the specifics of this situation and what we're planning to do going forward. In 2015, we learned from a report in The Guardian that a Cambridge University researcher named Alexander Kogan had shared data from a quiz app he operated on the Facebook platform, This Is Your Digital Life, with Cambridge Analytica. It is against our policies for developers to share data without people's consent. So we immediately banned Dr. Kogan's app from our platform, and we demanded that Dr. Kogan and certain other entities he had relationships with, including Cambridge Analytica, delete any information that they had received. Several weeks ago, we saw press reports alleging that some of this information may not have been deleted, as Dr. Kogan, Cambridge Analytica, and others had certified. Based on our own data, we estimate that a total of 305,000 people around the world installed the app This Is Your Digital Life, and an additional 86.3 million people were friends of people who installed that app, and therefore were potentially affected by data sharing. While the vast majority of these people were in the United States, we estimate that 272 people in Canada installed the app, potentially affecting 621,889 additional Canadians. This represents 0.7% of the people affected across the world. We take each case with the utmost seriousness, and that is why we're informing people if there's even a possibility that they may have been affected. We have a responsibility to make sure that what happened with Cambridge Analytica does not happen again. So we've undertaken a series of steps to increase the protections we're providing for people's information. Here are some of those steps. First, we need to make sure that developers like Dr. Kogan, who got access to a lot of information in the past, cannot get access to as much information anymore. We already made changes to the Facebook platform in 2014 that dramatically restrict the amount of data that app developers can receive, and to proactively review apps before they can use our platform. Because of these 2014 changes, a developer today would not have access to the same amount of data that Dr. Kogan was able to obtain. But there's more that we intend to do to limit the information developers can access and put more safeguards in place to prevent abuse. For instance, we're removing developers access to your data if you haven't used their app in 3 months. We're reducing the data you give an app when you use the new version of Facebook login to only your name, your profile photo, and your email address. That's a lot less than is available to developers on any other major app platform. And if a developer wants to use Facebook login to obtain more information than this, for example, access people's posts or other private data, we'll require them to sign a separate contract with us that imposes strict requirements. Second, we're in the process of investigating every app that had access to a large amount of data before we locked down our platform in 2014. If we detect suspicious activity, we'll do a full forensic audit. And if we find that someone is improperly using data, we'll ban them and we'll tell everyone affected. Finally, we're making it easier to understand which apps you've allowed access to your data. This past week, we started showing everyone a list of the apps they've used and an easy way to revoke permissions that they've granted to those apps in the past. This is something you can already do in your privacy settings, but we're putting it at the top of Newsfeed to be sure everyone sees it. We've also announced proposed updates to our data policy and terms of service to provide more information about our data practices and the choices people have. We hope this will better enable people to make informed decisions about their privacy and better understand how we use data across Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, and our other services. I'd like to turn it now back to my colleague Kevin to talk a bit about what we are doing with respect to election integrity in Canada.
Thanks, Rob. Nous reconnaissons que la
We acknowledge that the situation involving Cambridge Analytica raises broader questions about the integrity of elections using Facebook, and I want to conclude with a few comments on this, because we are working actively to make sure that we do our part to protect the integrity of federal elections in 2019. We know that your respective political leaders and parties continue to use Facebook as a key platform for civic participation, which underlines the importance of dealing with this problem seriously.
Establishment published last year a report outlining various cyber threats to the next federal election and identified 2 areas that Facebook sees a role in addressing: cybersecurity, the hacking into the online accounts of candidates and political parties, and the spreading of misinformation online. In response, we launched last fall our Canadian Election Integrity Initiative, which consists of the following 5 elements. To address cybersecurity, we launched a Facebook cyber hygiene guide created specifically for Canadian politicians and political parties. It provides key information for how everyone who is administering a political figure or party's Facebook presence can help keep their accounts and pages secure. I have brought copies of the guide with me, Mr. Chair, and with your permission later I will circulate them to members. We are offering cyber hygiene training to all of the federal political parties. And 3, we launched a new cyber threats email line for federal politicians and political parties. This email line is a direct pipe into our security team at Facebook and will help fast-track responses for compromised pages or accounts. To address misinformation online, we've partnered with Media Smarts, Canada's Centre for Digital and Media Literacy, on a 2-year project to develop thinking, resources, and public service announcements on how to spot misinformation online. This new initiative which we are calling Reality Check, will include lesson plans, interactive online missions, videos, and guides that will promote the idea that verifying information is an essential life and citizenship skill. And we launched our ads transparency test called View Ads here in Canada last November. This test, which is ongoing, allows anybody in Canada to view any and all Facebook ads, including ads for which you are not in the intended audience. All advertisers on Facebook are subject to View Ads, but we recognize it is an important part of our civic engagement efforts. Candidates running for office and organizations engaged in political advertising should be held accountable for what they say to citizens, and this feature gives people the chance to see all the things a candidate or organization is saying to everyone. This is a higher level of ads transparency than currently exists for any type of advertising, online or offline. Rob et moi espérons partager davantage.
Rob and I hope to share more about our efforts to protect personal data and election integrity, and we hope to get into more details when we answer your questions. We acknowledge that in the past we were too idealistic about how our technologies were being used, and we didn't focus enough on preventing abuse. We are making major changes to the way we work as a company in order to improve our approach.
Opportunity to appear before you today, and we would now be pleased to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chan and Mr. Sherman. First up for 7 minutes, Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Thanks very much. First, have you notified Canadian users? And if so, exactly how have you notified Canadian users?
Thank you very much for the question. We're in the process of notifying people in Canada and globally about the situation, and the way we'll let them know is there'll be information at the top of their newsfeed that will explain that they have access to information about which apps have received their information. If they're affected by Cambridge Analytica, they'll be notified about that as well.
And if someone had deleted their Facebook account, they wouldn't have any ability to be notified in all likelihood. So if a company cared more about its users than its share price, and it learned about a breach in 2016, wouldn't it have notified its users in 2016?
Well, I think it's important to note that the trust of people who use Facebook is paramount, and it's critical not only to our ethical obligations, but to our business obligations as well, because we realize if people don't feel like their information is protected on Facebook, they won't feel comfortable using our services. And so while certainly information about...
So why didn't you notify users in 2016?
Well, I think what our CEO Mark Zuckerberg has said is that in retrospect we should have done that. And going forward, if a situation like this occurs, then we will certainly do that.
Can you explain? So in the Canadian context, if I heard the numbers right, well, first the international context, it was 350,000 or so people consented to using an application and allowed the app developer to access 87 million user profiles. In Canada, if I've got it right, it's 272 people accessed it, giving access to 620,000 plus Canadian user profiles. How is that in compliance with the existing law?
Well, I think those numbers are generally correct, but it's important to note that we've taken a conservative approach here. We don't have perfect information exactly about which information was transferred at which time. So what we've aimed to do is err on the side of caution and notify more people rather than less.
I appreciate that in terms of the numbers, but in terms of our legislation here in Canada, PIPEDA, which requires consent, usually explicit consent, in some cases implied consent, where was the consent of 620,000 users?
Well, I think the approach that we've taken at the time, and as I mentioned in my opening statement, we've made significant changes to platforms since this information was available to restrict the information that app developers can receive. For the 272 people who specifically authorized the app, there was a screen that popped up that would have notified them of what information the developer wanted to receive, and they would have
can't consent on behalf of other people, right?
With regard to the...
Sorry, it seems to me that you made changes. Perhaps you're in compliance with the law now, but it seems pretty clear that you weren't in compliance with the law previously. Is that fair?
Well, I think with regard to the people who were friends of those affected, or those who were using the app, our data policy and our disclosures at the time were very clear that this is how platform worked. I think it's important to note that as our changes in 2014 reflect, We don't think that's the right way for platform to operate, and it's not the way that platform operates today. But this is something that at the time and since we've been in discussions with the Privacy Commissioner of Canada about. And so while we think that it's not the appropriate way for platform to operate, we also want to make sure that we're in compliance with all applicable laws.
Yeah, not only is it not an appropriate way, but it's also contrary to our law, the way you previously had designed the system. Zuckerberg's noted that you're open to regulation. You've taken some additional steps. What regulation specifically do you think would fix the problems that you've experienced?
Well, I think there are a number of different steps that need to be taken, and I think the first one, as you pointed out, is that Facebook needs to take responsibility, and we hope that we have and need to continue to do work to make sure that people's information is safe on our platform. That's something that we've invested in and that we have a responsibility to do over and above the law. I think as Kevin mentioned in his opening comments, we have a responsibility to take a broader view of what we should do. I think in conversations about privacy regulation, the conversations that I have in Canada and around the world, I think taking a principles-based approach that provides strong privacy protections to Canadians and to people everywhere is important. That's something that exists in PIPEDA today. I know that this committee is undertaking a study and has published a report with recommendations with regard to PIPEDA, and I think that there's a lot in that study that's worth considering. But I think the fundamental approach of PIPEDA, of having a principles-based approach and giving the Privacy Commissioner broad authority and discretion in how to apply that to new technologies and new situations, feels like an appropriate model.
Though interestingly, we've had a principles-based approach previously when Facebook disrespected those principles and failed to abide by our existing legislation. So 2014, you've made changes, but all of those app developers who have previously collected information still have that information. Can you give a sense to Canadians of exactly what detailed information that entails? So my understanding is for app developers, they would have had access to the education, work affiliation, personal relationships, friends lists, likes, location. What else?
Well, obviously, the specific information that's affected depends on the specific app. Apps would have had
situation.
To go.
What's the worst situation? The most personal information that would have been shared with app developers?
So app developers would have had the ability to receive information that people have shared on their profiles, things like their likes, their city, where they live, those kinds of information. We've made changes since then, and those were pieces of information that were shared under the privacy settings of the person affected. So you would have had the ability to choose whether to share the information in the first place. You would have had the ability to choose who to share it with. So you might have shared it with some friends, but not others. And you would have had the ability to choose whether those friends could bring that information to apps. Now, as I mentioned, since then, we've significantly restricted the amount of information that's available to apps.
There's an app developer of a cow clicker game who posted on The Atlantic, and he said it was a really rudimentary game. And if I had clicked on that app and played this ridiculous cow clicker game, this app developer would have had access to my friend's marital status. Does that make sense to you?
It doesn't. It's one of those things that in our developer policies, which we require all developers to abide by, we impose a series of restrictions on what information they can collect and how they can use it. Among those restrictions is a rule that says developers cannot ask for more information than they need to actually operate the service that they're providing. And since 2014, we've operated an upfront review process that looks at that among many other things. But I think certainly, it's not our intention that apps use Facebook platform to collect information that they don't need. And as we announced several weeks ago, we're making much more significant restrictions in the amount of information that most apps can get.
Unfortunately, those changes are only being made once this situation has been made public, and not because you ever thought it was the right thing to do. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Erskine-Smith. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Kent.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Chan, Mr. Sherman, for attending this committee today. Good to see you again. These data mining scandals seem to have finally penetrated the consciousness here in Canada, Canadians, that the data world is one largely without national boundaries, without effective protection or regulation of the personal information that Canadians voluntarily or unconsciously surrender as their part of the contract to use your service, and in many ways it is a fine service. I use it politically and have no complaints in that area. But of course, our focus here is on the abuses that data mining has and would potentially have to interfere in our democratic process. So my first question is, where should Canadians look at Facebook for responsibility and accountability, to your Canadian entity or to the parent company? When did Facebook Canada learn of the abuse of personal users' privacy? And did Facebook Canada, Mr. Chan, individually and separately hold back the reporting of that abuse for 2 years, as the parent company did? Were you aware of that breach for the past 2 years?
No, sir. I mean, we would have known. Well, I mean, to talk about the particular instance, we knew. I think, as everybody learned through press reports back. I forget the exact date, but about a month ago or something like that, sir. So that would be the extent to our knowledge in Canada.
Okay. Now, as you know, our Conservative government strengthened Canada's Personal Information and Electronic Data Protection Act, PIPEDA, in 2015, just before the election in 2015. This Liberal government has, after sitting for 3 years on creating the regulations, some of the regulations introduced in that legislation for the breach of security safeguards regulations, yesterday very quietly posted regulations on the Canada Gazette regarding timely reporting of breaches to the Privacy Commissioner and to affected individuals. And so can Facebook Canada assure this committee that the next violation of users' privacy won't be held back for 2 years as it was in this case?
Sir, absolutely. We are already taking action, as Rob mentioned. We are already taking action to notify all users of the particular instance for Cambridge Analytica. I think our commitment and the commitment of our CEO is that, in fact, we're going to go back and do an audit of all the other apps that were in place at the time when the platform permissions were set a certain way. And if we find evidence of wrongdoing there, we will also suspend and prevent those apps from functioning on Facebook, and then we will notify all potentially affected users for those apps as well. So absolutely, going forward, that is very much our intent, sir.
Thank you. Now, when our committee or elements of our committee visited Facebook's headquarters in Washington last October, and thank you for your hospitality, for sharing assurances on the company's commitment to social media operations and precautions, and some of the demonstrations of wonderful new products like the Oculus virtual reality devices. We discussed at that time in our general discussion the possibility of new regulations here in Canada with regards to PIPEDA, or perhaps even going beyond the existing regulations, with more meaningful regulations and more meaningful penalties for violations of Canadian users' privacy. Now, we were told, almost in passing, that any new Canadian regulations might well put at risk Facebook investments in Canada along the lines of the $7 million invested in the artificial intelligence project in the Montreal hub. I'm wondering whether today, after Cambridge Analytica, AIQ, Mr. Zuckerberg's testimony in Washington last week, whether that same caution would still be made by Facebook to Canada against more meaningful regulation.
Well, sir, I will turn to Rob for the more specific answer about sort of what the prospective view is. But I just want to be very clear, sir. We certainly do not base our investment decisions on the specific regulatory environment. In particular, I think I did, in fact, sir, as you allude to, I did read some reference to some interview somewhere about that point, specifically about our AI Research Center. I just want to be very clear. That is not at all our view. I don't. That is not the representation we would have made. In fact, we are quite proud. Quite the opposite. We're quite proud to be supporters of AI in Canada, in Montreal, and in Quebec. We are a global leader in this regard, and Facebook's very proud to be part of that. I just want to be very clear. Just even last week, we were in Montreal. We had an event that we did in partnership with the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, where we were celebrating the Montreal AI ecosystem. And so at no time would we have made investment in our AI lab contingent on any other consideration other than the fact that there is talent in Canada, and we feel fortunate and honored to be part of that.
Mr. Sherman?
And so with regard to the PIPEDA study more broadly, we appreciated the committee's attention to this issue. Canadians deserve strong privacy protections, and we appreciated the opportunity to provide information as a part of that study. I think in looking at privacy regulation more broadly, I think it's important, as the committee's report pointed out, that Canadians have information and transparency about information, how their information is going to be used, that they're in control of that information. And a lot of those concepts exist in PIPEDA as it stands today. I think if you look at Facebook's history in Canada and our engagements with the Privacy Commissioner, a lot of the improvements, including many of the improvements that we've talked about around Facebook platform, come directly out of our engagement with the Privacy Commissioner. I note that the committee has suggested several changes and improvements that might be made. I think it's appropriate to look at those, and I think one of the ones that you've already mentioned around data breach notification particularly is something that we've learned some hard lessons about, and that I think is certainly worth taking.
So just very briefly, one of our recommendations was for the government to consider more closely aligning with the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, which comes into effect in May this year. Would Facebook be comfortable, Facebook parent company, Facebook Canada, be comfortable if Canada were to adopt similar GDPR regulation?
Well, we think everybody who uses Facebook service globally deserves strong privacy protections. That includes people in Canada, of course, and people in Europe. And we've put in a lot of work, as we have in Canada, to provide those strong protections. As a part of our work to prepare for GDPR, we've built a number of new privacy controls, settings, and other engagements, and those are things that we plan to roll out in Canada as well.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Angus.
Thank you, Mr. Chan, Mr. Sherman, for joining us this morning. At the outset, I want to say that Facebook in my region has been revolutionary. I represent a region that's bigger than the United Kingdom. I have communities that have no access to roads. I have some of the poorest communities in North America. The access of Facebook for young Indigenous people, for people contacting my office. I don't use the phone anymore. If I got a medical crisis in Saskatchewan, I get a message on Facebook, they get a response. So the power of Facebook to do good is incredible. But we are here because the power for Facebook to be misused, to do terrible things, is also at issue. And it is the question before us is the failure of Facebook to respect the absolute power it has. It sense in some ways that it thinks domestic laws are somehow quaint. I was very surprised this morning to learn that Facebook has shifted 1.5 billion users from Facebook Ireland to Facebook California to escape the GDPR. So, Mr. Chan, will you tell this committee that as an act of good faith, you will immediately implement the GDPR for all users in Canada for Facebook?
I think I'll let Rob address that one.
Mr. Chan, you represent Facebook Canada. He represents Facebook California. I want to know, will you put the GDPR, will you commit today so that you don't have to be regulated to do it? You will self-regulate in Canada with the GDPR, yes or no?
Sir, I'm not aware of the point that you just raised. I'm not familiar with that point that you say you've just learned.
Would you bring, we're talking about 1.5 billion users that were shifted to escape European law this morning. So,
Mr. Angus,
Simple
If I
question.
may answer
Will
the
you
question.
just say, we'll implement it in Canada, and then we can move on to the next question?
Mr. Angus, our plan is to provide the same privacy controls and settings that we're offering in GDPR, the same engagement, the same engagements on the same topics to people in Canada that we're offering
Will
in
you
GDPR.
implement the full GDPR? I mean, you tell us you're going to do tweaks. Why would you need to move 1.5 billion users out of the range of the European law? So
I want to be clear. Prior to today, prior to our data policy changes, Canadians were served by Facebook Inc. in California, and the entity with which they contract was Facebook Inc. That remains the same, so there's no change with regard to Canadians.
Okay, I mean, we're here because of social app that Alexander Kogan used that gave him access to 85 million users that was transferred to a political entity that may have undermined elections around the world. And when Facebook became aware of this, Facebook claimed that this was absolutely not a breach. How can you be trusted with self-regulation if in the face of such a massive misuse of data that Facebook did not tell anybody because they thought it wasn't worth telling them because it wasn't a breach?
Well, I think it's critically important that we uphold the trust of our community, and part of what we've learned as a part of this is that we need to communicate more robustly about what's going on.
Okay,
I think
so communicate more robustly. You became aware of this in 2015. You started telling Canadian users 3 weeks ago. That's not robust. That's getting caught. So again, the question before our committee is Facebook needing regulation because you cannot be trusted to do the right thing with the personal information. I want to reference you to Sandy Paraklis, who was brought in to do the privacy efforts to fix the problems at Facebook. He warned Facebook about numerous third-party apps, including a developer that was generating profiles of children without consent. And he said that Facebook's response to him was they did not want any negative press and to deal with these issues to get them out of the way as quickly as possible. He proposed a deeper audit on how the misuse of data was being used, and Facebook said, quote, "Do you really want to see what you'll find?" So I put it to you, Mr. Sherman. Obviously, Facebook hasn't taken this issue seriously. We will have to look at regulation. Mr. Zuckerberg said regulation. Do you think that Facebook has failed to represent the best interests of the people around the world who trust it?
I think it's certainly our intention to do the best that we can in protecting the privacy and the information of users on our service. It's clear in this situation that we did not do enough. We're sorry for that, and we need to invest in doing more work. With regard to notifying people about situations like this and notifying regulators, I think we found out about this in the first instance from news reporting. There was news reporting in the intervening period about this situation, and so it certainly was not something that we intended to keep a secret. That said, I think notifying Canadians and others who are affected is something that we should have done and that we will do going forward. With regard to the broader characterization of the discussions at Facebook, I don't remember working with Mr. Parakilis. He was at Facebook some time ago, and I'm not familiar with the specific
I guess it's just my concern is the issue
but
of a corporate culture that has so much power over data that seems so loosey-goosey about its use. And we are talking about data that may have undermined the integrity of international elections. Mr. Parakilis was brought in to deal with the privacy concerns at Facebook. And he said that the overriding issue, time and time again, was to get the negative stories to stop. So 3 weeks ago, in the middle of an international investigation, Facebook suddenly announced that they were taking the privacy concerns of Canadians seriously. Are you here, Mr. Chan, to engage with us on the issue of regulation? Or are you just here to try and make the bad stories stop, which seems to be, as Mr. Pericles said, Facebook policy?
Absolutely, sir. We're here to engage with you substantively. On the issue of regulation, I think our CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, has been very clear that we do not oppose regulation. I think we want the right kind of regulation, and I think.
So is GDPR the right kind of regulation for Canada?
But if I may, sir, I mean,
Because that's the question.
There are some other things I just wish to add with respect to regulation. I think maybe Rob would have some views on the specific question that you have with respect to privacy regulation. But I just want to point out to the committee so that people have this in mind is I think for a lot of the things, and Mr. Angus, you touched on election integrity, in many respects on that front, we are not waiting for regulation. We think it's the responsible thing to do, to be proactive and to do things now when we can. And so with respect to two things, one is view ads, our ad transparency test in Canada. There is obviously, as you know, members, no obligation to do that. We are actually rolling this out. We've tested it first in Canada. It was up until this week the only jurisdiction anywhere in the world where that was in place. And again, we are being proactive. We're not waiting for regulation. We're doing the right thing based on what we learned coming out of the U.S. presidential election and the abuses that did happen on our platform. The second one I would speak to with respect to regulation, again, Mr. Angus, is with respect to our Canadian Election Integrity Initiative. There is a report, as I mentioned in my opening statement, from the Communications Security Establishment that talked about the potential cyber threats to the next federal election. There are a number of things in there. There were two that clearly we had a piece of the responsibility for. Again, cybersecurity and misinformation. And there, again, I just want to respectfully submit that we are not waiting for regulation. We are taking action now to address this well in advance of the federal election. Maybe I'll turn it to Rob about.
We're at time, Mr. Chan. So next up we have for 7 minutes, Mr. Picard.
Merci, Monsieur Chairman, Monsieur Chan.
Thank you, Mr. Chan. Mr. Sherman, I would like to move away from the sensational and scandalous point of view to look at the substance, but I would like to have things explained in lay language about the basic situation. Not the ultimate user, but rather the regular user. What are we really talking about here? I have a simplistic deduction. I think it would be ridiculous to think that Facebook invested billions of dollars to have people just set up an electronic scrapbook of our day-to-day activities and pictures and so on. It's an effective way of communicating and a way to communicate. So it's a communications means. A company will invest hundreds of millions of dollars, but not just to allow people to communicate. So I thought that it was with the intention of having people participate in communication in the larger community and provide a lot of information and have access to information. So this value, this product, is, of course, something that can be used commercially. And how do we set the threshold between private and public information in that context?
Incredibly important question. And as you point out, our goal is to provide a service that enables people to communicate with the people and organizations and ideas that are important to them, and to empower people to make the choices that are right for them. And so that's fundamentally
Le côté ludique de la chose, le service de communication.
But in fact, it's a great pleasure to talk to one another, to communicate. It doesn't cost very much. But in business, it's about products, it's about commerce, and these communications are really a pretext to market. So how do you decide about the quality of private information, the public information, the value of all that? Because if something is being marketed,
colleague Rob was trying to get at that, but allow me to try, if I may, sir. The history of Facebook is that obviously, as you probably know, it wasn't actually started off as a business. It was actually a project of our CEO's when he was a student, and the intent was very much, as you point out, to try to connect friends together. Over time, obviously, that service has evolved, but at the core of what we do is still very much to connect friends and family together. I think it's fair to say that obviously at some point there was a need to monetize the platform. And so advertising became a model that worked well for Facebook. But I would sort of point out that I think if you roll back the time to around 2014, it wasn't actually clear that advertising was going to be, especially mobile advertising, was going to be something that would actually work for Facebook. And so I would say, with all due respect, I think very much for all of us who work there, and certainly for Rob and I, the sense of again, the optimism that perhaps we put too much in, but the sense of optimism of trying to help connect the world and make the world a more informed and more trusted community, I think those things still very much are guiding North Stars today.
And sir, if I might add with regard to advertising specifically, I think are 2 points. The first is, as you point out, advertising is an important part of the service, in part because it allows people to use Facebook for free, but also because good advertising, relevant advertising, can actually be valuable to people. And I think we have a responsibility to build our advertising business in a way that also protects people's privacy. So, for example, an advertiser can tell us that they want to reach people who are 18 and over in Ottawa who are interested in cars, and we can deliver the advertisement to those people without providing those people's private information back to
Gentlemen,
the advertiser.
stop. Je ne parle pas de publicité.
I'm not talking about advertising, though. The question is very specific. How do you identify the difference between private and public information? That's a very simple question. If I put my travel photos on my Facebook page, I can expect to have travel agency advertising. But if I start getting advertising and connections about more personal information, then that disturbs me, because this private information is the very basis of the problem. Of course, I can't accept, or rather, I don't have any choice if I'm looking at a cable channel and I have 20 minutes of advertising. But with Facebook, there has to be this threshold between public and private information.
The comment that there's a difference between public and private information. Whenever you post something on Facebook, you have the ability to choose right then and there whether that information will be visible publicly, whether it will be visible to your friends, or whether it will be visible to a narrower category of people. One of the things that we've invested in very heavily, and that I think we need to invest more in, as Kevin talked about, is transparency around advertising, and specifically to your point, the specific information or the specific interests that are used to judge what advertisements will show to people. And so that means a couple of things. First, it means there are some things that, to your point, we shouldn't make available for advertising targeting at all. Second, it means that we should tell people, and we do tell people when they see particular ads, why they're seeing those specific ads. So, for example, in my earlier example, if we think that you're interested in cars, we'll tell you that that's the reason. And third, we need to put people in control. So if they'd prefer not to see ads based on particular kinds of information, they should be able to do that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Picard. Next up for 5 minutes, Mr. Gord.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Sherman and Mr. Chan. Along the same lines, Facebook over the past 15 years has changed the world of information and the world of advertising. There is very sophisticated advertising. For example, if you have somebody who sells bicycles wanting to target a certain audience, perhaps in my area, it would be possible to get information right away about a certain bike. I think that Facebook is able to manage that sort of thing. Is that correct?
The basic way that advertising works on Facebook is that an advertiser could come to us. For example, an advertiser in your riding might be able to say, we're selling bicycles. We want to reach people in this area who are interested in bicycles, and then we would then deliver the advertisement to those people. Again, as I said before, without telling the advertiser the specific people who would have seen it. But our goal is, and this is something that people tell us that is important when they see advertising, to show people ads that are actually relevant and useful to them. If we're using their time, we want to make sure that there are ads that people will find to be valuable.
Je vais continuer. Cette publicité-là qui est en
So that kind of advertising that is targeted, somebody clicks on the bike ad, is there artificial intelligence that groups those reactions, or is it outside groups that are doing this?
Based on the signals that we receive, based on, for example, things that you may have liked on Facebook, the interest that you've expressed on Facebook, we try to have some estimation of what your stated interest may be, and through that you're going to get potential advertising because you're in a certain audience that potentially, for example, likes bikes. But I do want to unpack a bit what what Rob was saying earlier.
excusez, vous nous avez répondu à ma question.
You've answered my question, thank you. But on a different note, Mr. Chan, you mentioned that politicians used Facebook because we want to get information out. Are there political parties that use it to advertise on behalf of their party? Well, we use Facebook to receive information because it is very effective for doing that. But are there political parties that actually advertise, that have bought advertising? Well, I'm not sure, but I think that all the parties in the House have done that. So they sell advertising. If I'm a political party and I put an ad on Facebook and people click on it, or for some other parties, but is there a second step? Could that same political party put on an ad to try to get people vote for them? So if people click on the NDP or the Conservatives or the Liberals, is it the advertiser that would go further with that, or the party?
If the individual or the party chooses to, or the organization chooses to, they're able to say, for example, for those who have expressed an interest in my advertisement, can I reach that same audience again? Now, to be very clear, you will never know who these individuals are. So you can never go back and say specifically, Mr. Sherman, I want to reach Mr. Sherman. But you can say for people who have, let's say, commented on my post or liked my post, I'd like to reach that same audience again. You have that ability if you choose to avail yourself to it, yes.
Je comprends, M. Chang, que...
Okay, I understand, Mr. Chan, that you can't target a person, and a political party doesn't necessarily ask for that, but they want to reach those who have clicked on their ad, and Facebook provides that service. Or is it a third party that makes it possible to target those that have clicked on the political advertising? Facebook is changing history because now it is possible to reach a critical mass of people, and that could change the result of a tight election. And elections are very important for our choices in our society and our future. So if that service is provided, it has to be equal for everyone. and it shouldn't be possible for one party to go further than another party, because that could make a big difference in the result of an election or the choices that a society makes. So either we have to be very careful about it or make sure that we have a level playing field, because if somebody uses Facebook in that way, there could be information available to a third party that isn't available to others.
We're well over time, so.
Oh, I'm
quick
sorry.
response.
Yes. Just with respect to just we treat all advertisers on Facebook equally, and they have the access to the same products and the same services. And that I think I'll leave it at that, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chan. Next up for 5 minutes, Mr. Saini.
Good morning to you both, gentlemen. The other committee that I sit on is the Committee of Foreign Affairs and International Development. And in January 2017, I had the opportunity to actually visit Latvia ahead of our troops being deployed there. And one of the things that we were briefed upon was the disinformation campaign that would emanate prior to our troops going there. And that turned out to be true. There were many accusations leveled against our troops. You know what I mean? That the deployment, the entire deployment was gay, that they're working to turn Latvian kids gay, that they were training neo-Nazis. Now, for me, that's a concern because it puts the troops at risk. And this is reminiscent of me reminds me of the Pizzagate scandal that happened in the United States. So my question to you is, what are you doing to stop the spread of this information on your platforms? And how quickly are you able to react to that kind of misinformation, especially when lives are on the line?
Thank you very much, sir, for that question. Obviously, I think just to roll back a bit, looking at what happened in the U.S. presidential election, sir, we were clearly slow to react to this. We were slow to get on top of it. I want to assure you that we are now putting all of our efforts to address this challenge head on. I'm not familiar, sir, with the particular example that you gave, but I can give you, if I may, just sort of in general terms, or how we think about the challenge of misinformation. There are. It turns out upon study and research on this phenomenon, there are kind of two things that we've identified. One is sort of the classic clickbaity, low-quality content misinformation, where people may not have a particular political objective, but they're going to put stuff online. They're going to try to put stuff on Facebook. That's the intent is to have people click through to a site, right, where they're kind of publishing very low-quality, potentially fake information, and get people to click through, and so then they monetize. And so a lot of this turns out is financially motivated. And so what we're trying to do is using new technologies like machine learning, like artificial intelligence, as we talked about earlier, to identify this kind of behavior, and through our signals be able to prevent them from using Facebook ads. So effectively drying up the financial incentive to cause mischief, sir.
I can appreciate the position Facebook is in, with 2.2 billion users and billions of pieces of information moving on a daily basis. And I agree with that. But this is not low quality. And this affects our troops who are deployed around the world. And I don't think it was done to monetize. I think it was there to spread disinformation and cause harm. So I think you're talking about two different levels. The low quality is monetization. That's fine. But there's a higher quality when you're talking about troops or other entities that are in different parts of the world serving. I can appreciate your position because of the amount of information that's moving, but still that information has to be removed because lives are on the line. So what assurances can you give not only this committee but Canadians that troops are being protected around the world from this disinformation?
Well, absolutely. We take that very seriously, sir. Certainly trying to protect people and prevent real-world harm is obviously paramount to what we do on our service. On specific cases like that, what we do is we have a set of community standards that makes very clear, I think, things that we can all agree on should not be on the service. So no hate speech, no incitement to violence, no pornography, no terrorist content. I think what you talk about, again, I'm not familiar with the specific instance, but if this were reported to us and found to be in violation of these community standards, and it would appear from what you're saying that this is in fact the case, we would take it down. We have We have tens of thousands of people working on safety around the world. A good chunk of those people actually focus on precisely what you're talking about.
But I want to move to another point. I don't have that much time. BBC recently reported that Facebook is requesting that the Canadian European users grant them permission to use facial recognition software to identify them in photos and videos. Now, this is an opt-in and not an opt-out service. But given recent activities, how can we have the confidence that this new data will be handled properly? And part of this issue is also to create new friend suggestions. How exactly will it work? What will be the parameters surrounding this?
Thank you very much for the question, sir. As you point out, face recognition is a feature that we're rolling out in Canada. It's something that we've offered in many parts of the world for quite some time, I think probably around 6 years at this point. The primary use of face recognition technology is to suggest that people tag each other in photos. So for example, if I upload a photo of Kevin, I might get a suggestion to tag him. And that enables him to know that the photo exists, take action if he wants to do that, report it to Facebook if he has a concern, and all of those things. We've also expanded our use of face recognition to enable people to better manage their identity. So, for example, to know if somebody's impersonating you, to know if somebody has posted a photo of you where they haven't tagged you, for example, and also for accessibility purposes.
Now, because this is an opt-in feature, the GDPR has tried to limit pre-ticked boxes for opt-in consent. But in this case, you would have to tick the box that you don't want to be part of it, but then you'd have to go into the manage settings to reconfirm that. Is that not a little bit, I mean, if somebody consents or doesn't consent, why do they have to go through the second step to confirm that? Why isn't the first initial step not necessary? Because a lot of people may not know that they have to take the second step to confirm what they wanted to do in the first step.
Well, we think it's important to be clear with people about how we use technologies as a part of Facebook, including face recognition. So our plan as we roll this out.
But it isn't clear, because if you tick the box.
Time is well past, but if you could just quickly finish your answer, Mr. Sherman.
Sure, absolutely. So our expectation is we will tell people how we're using face recognition technology. They'll have the opportunity to make one of two choices. The boxes are of equal prominence. One is to say that they accept it and they want to agree. The other is that they want to make a different choice. And so people will have the equal ability.
Mr. Shane, thank you. Next up for 5 minutes, Mr. Kent.
Oh, sorry, thank you. Some might say, some observers, some critics might say that the Facebook business plan is out of control. Would Facebook consider, in the absence of the regulations and protocols that you're now developing, that Mr. Zuckerberg in Washington last week said the company is now developing, downsize or resize the company to something closer to its original form, to eliminate some of the issues with third-party advertising, with vandals who are abusing the system one way or the other in terms of disinformation, fake news, if you will. It's a serious question. It would be a costly question, absolutely, for Facebook. But might it not be time for Facebook to downsize its business plan to more effectively protect user privacy?
Well, I think it's important for us to invest very heavily in protecting user privacy, and to some of the other questions that have been asked today, to taking steps to ensure integrity on the platform. And so I'd say two things about that. The first is I do think you're right that we need to focus. And particularly across the company, what we've tried to do is to focus people who work on our products and services, not in the context of Facebook platform, which we're talking about today, but in other areas as well, to focus their work on promoting integrity, protecting people's data, protecting people's experiences, and protecting and promoting our broader obligation. And so I think certainly we need to focus in that way. As a part of our broader obligation, I think looking across Facebook developers and other third parties that we have relationships with in the category of Mr. Kogan, for example, I think we're going to have to invest very heavily in additional personnel and additional processes to make sure that we have oversight in those areas as well.
Mr. Chan?
Yeah, if I may, sir. I mean, I think one way to look at it, and the things that Rob kind of went through in his opening statement, I mean, very much I think the process we're engaged in is very much locking down the platform. So I think, in a way, kind of what you're talking about, making sure that certain things, I mean, we already made significant changes, as Rob mentioned, in 2014, but even like today, subsequent to the Cambridge Analytica news reports, we are doing a whole bunch of things retroactively to look at what happened with these apps, but then also prospectively doing a lot to change the way in which apps work on Facebook and drastically limiting the amount of information they can get. So I think that's right. I think the other thing I should just point out is that obviously our CEO has been very clear that this is going to be a significant investment. We expect a material impact on profitability, and I think he said that, and I just want to, again, just make that clear to the committee as well.
Okay. Some of my colleagues today have been talking about the complexity involved, the volume of material involved in terms of acceptance clicks, opting in, opting out. And for years, we have had largely ignored voices from academia, from the tech world, cautioning users about the way they access and what the contract is when they click the accept box and basically agree to gain a user adventure, a good user application, at the expense of revealing their personal privacy in greater or lesser amounts. Do you think it's time now to simplify the cautions, or is there a need for greater public education, perhaps even in schools, warning people who are going to use social media about the dangers, the pitfalls, the traps that they may encounter in terms of rushing to click acceptance to gain use?
Well, I think we at Facebook, and actually we as a broader society too, should be investing in more ways of communicating with people about privacy rather than less. And I think one of the things that I know the Privacy Commissioner of Canada has emphasized is that there are different kinds of uses of information that require different kinds of notice. Some uses are more sensitive than others, and I certainly agree with that sentiment. I think the way that we've approached this at Facebook is to both provide more detailed information in places like our privacy policy, so that people that want to dig into the details of how information is used and how they can control it can do that, but also to communicate with people as outside of the privacy policy in ways that are maybe more accessible on a day-to-day basis about specific information, like how to control who can communicate with you, how Facebook uses information as a part of delivering ads and how you can control that, et cetera. So I think all of those are important. I think your idea of doing communications in schools or in communities to help people gain literacy and ability to make choices that are right for them is a thoughtful one, and I think that's something that we should take on board.
And if I just may add, sir, I mean, on the specific thing about reaching out to the broader ecosystem, working with partners, I mean, certainly we do that in Canada with Media Smarts. As I mentioned, it's Canada's digital literacy organization, and they do work closely with schools and classrooms across the country. And I think that is an important ultimate backstop. That is not to say that we don't have responsibility for our part, and I think Rob's very clear. Not only have we historically done this, we're doing more, and I think with the recent the recent controls that we've announced that make it even easier. I think before you had to go to like 20, potentially up to 20 different screens to control your experience on Facebook. We're now centralizing all of that in one a map, if you will, where you can kind of play with all the dials and have complete control over your experience and your privacy on Facebook. We completely agree. That's very important, and we're moving to roll that out, not just in Canada, but around the world.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. Next up for 5 minutes, Ms. Vanderbilt.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank both of you for being here. As you know, this is really a crisis of confidence that many Canadians feel. It's a medium that we're using in our social interactions. We're using it to gather information and news, so I appreciate you answering the questions. I do have some concerns regarding some testimony that we heard in our last meeting from Mr. Chris Vickery, who is an expert in data breaches, and he referenced that there was another Facebook breach involving about 48 million records. And he alluded that this could even involve Messenger, where people's most intimate messages to one another in the private setting may have been breached. It was testimony we heard just 2 days ago, but are you aware of this potential breach? And is it possible that there could be others?
Well, I think certainly we've said that we intend to undertake an investigation with regard to Cambridge Analytica and the situation there. We need to understand what happened and where that information went, and if it's still out there, we need to make sure that that's taken care of. With regard to the other situations, I think you're right. It's possible that there are other situations out there, and I think the one that I think you may be referring to is a situation of scraping where even public information that's sort of available on Facebook and on the internet was collected by a party. If that was done, that was in violation of our policies, and I think that's another area where we have taken steps but need to take more steps. I think it's certainly a possibility that there are other incidents out there, and it's incumbent upon us to do the work to understand those and mitigate them.
I mean, we are talking about one app that Cambridge Analytica was using for information. I mean, there are hundreds of apps. We see invitations every day on our Facebook feeds, and you're talking about 272 people who joined one app, and that affected 600,000 people. So with all the other hundreds of apps out there, how big might this problem actually be?
Well, I think that's something that we need to get to the bottom of. We have undertaken already an effort to look back at apps that would have had access to that level of data prior to locking down our platform in 2014. We're in the process of doing that, so we don't have firm answers on exactly what the scale of the problem is at this point, but it's something that we do need to undertake and that we're working to do expeditiously. I think in addition to looking backwards, we have an obligation to look forwards, and that involves, I think, really three things. The first is making sure that we're locking down the information that is available, so going forward, the kind of information that was available previously won't be available. The second is, for the limited information that is available, we need to make sure we're exercising effective oversight. And that we're understanding who has that information and what they're doing with it. And then the third thing, as we've talked about earlier today, is communication. We need to commit, and we have committed to communicate much more quickly and much more proactively with people when these situations arise.
Now on the oversight piece, the second piece that you mentioned, I noted that in your opening remarks you mentioned that apps that have information will be removed after 3 months, that permissions will be revoked if it looks like they're being abused. But what our committee has heard is that once somebody has access to this large volume of information about an individual, they can create psychosocial behavioral profiles on that person, so that even, for instance, in Cambridge Analytica, if the information has been returned to Facebook and deleted from the servers, it doesn't matter anymore because they've got that behavioral profile, which then could be in the hands of anybody. How do you prevent that from happening, and how do you make sure that that flow of information is stemmed to begin with?
So I think there are two answers to that. One is a policy answer and one is an enforcement answer. With regard to the policy piece, it was at the time and continues to be a violation of our rules for a developer to use information in that way, and that would restrict both their use of the information that they directly received from Facebook as well as any downstream uses like the profiling that you're talking about. So those would both be violations of our rules. We're undertaking to investigate that ourselves. We understand that the privacy commissioner the information commissioner, in the UK, which has jurisdiction over Cambridge Analytica, is undertaking an investigation, and we're cooperating with that. We understand that the privacy commissioner in Canada is doing so as well, and we're cooperating there. So we need to take both of those. We need to cooperate with both of those investigations and understand what's happening. With regard to enforcement, one of the things that we need to do, and that I think after the regulators that are undertaking their investigations have told us that they think it's safe for us to do that, we need to understand whether any of that downstream data exists. If it still does, we would take the position that it's just in the same category as the earlier data and needs to be deleted.
Thank you. Well. I have one more question. I know I have limited time, but who owns the data that is put on Facebook? Obviously, the public data is public domain, but when you have a message that you're sending to someone, you put your photos in friends and family only. Who owns that data?
If you put information on Facebook, you own that data, and that's stated explicitly in our terms of service.
Okay, and so therefore you can remove that data at any time, be notified if somebody else is using that data. Is that something that you're looking into?
That's right. So if you put data on, that's correct. If you put data on Facebook and you want to delete it, you can delete that specific piece of data. As we referred to earlier, you can delete your account entirely if you want, and remove all the data in your account if that's what you want to do. And I think one of the lessons that we've learned as a part of this is communicating more proactively with people if their data is misused, and that's something we intend to do as well.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm out of time.
Yes,
hopefully
thank
get
you.
another round. Thank you.
Next up for a 3-minute round, Mr. Angus.
Thank you very much. we've been talking about the data breach and the corporate culture at Facebook in response to it. Mr. Chan, I'd like to talk a bit about the corporate culture of Facebook Canada, because you're very, very busy in terms of outreach. You've met with the Election Minister Gould, Minister Morneau, Minister Duncan, Minister Jolie, Minister McKenna, Minister Carolyn Bennett, who said she was absolutely inspired by your, quote, wise and frank counsel, which is very impressive.
I want to thank the minister. That's very generous.
Well, she's a wonderful woman, so I can see that. But you're not registered to lobby, and none of your staff at Facebook Canada are registered as lobbyists. Why not?
Well, sir, look, thank you for the question. If I may, this question does go to the heart of the company's integrity and, quite frankly, my integrity personally. So I appreciate the opportunity to address this head on, if I may. At no time has Facebook come close to meeting the threshold for registration as a lobbyist. We review this posture on a monthly basis, sir, and will, of course, register if and when we meet the threshold.
Okay, could I just, because the lobbying commissioner has raised a red flag about that threshold many, many times. Because if you're a company, I talk with companies all the time, you hire someone who comes from the governing party, you work with Liberal Party, someone who knows the inner workings, Privy Council, that's your experience. You don't have to waste your time with drudgery of doing 20% lobbying. You just call up Minister Morneau, and he's going to meet with you. So you don't ever have to meet that. But other companies, out of prudence, register because they recognize that what they're doing is lobbying, because that's what you were doing. You're lobbying ministers. So why don't you follow the standards? I mean, Google registers to lobby, Amazon, every other company. Why does Facebook think these laws are quaint?
Sir, if I may, to be very, very clear, the meeting you're referring to with Mr. Morneau, again, with all due respect to all parties involved, his office reached out to Facebook. He wanted some advice on how to do Facebook Live for his budget speech.
Okay, I get that. But here's the thing. You are registered as the company's leading public policy maker in Canada, facilitating ongoing dialogue about a broad range of issues that impact the internet sector. I mean, my light bulb breaks. I don't call the head of General Electric to come and fix it. And yet you show up to help him figure out how to get more likes. Like, isn't that a waste of your time?
If you make it that, if you paint it out that way, I just, that is what I spend my time doing, sir. I'm proud of it.
Well, I know that, but you have enormous access. I mean, you're very friendly with these people. So why would we expect government to regulate you when you're so nice? And no company, and it's nothing about Facebook, no company wants regulation. That's why they come and meet us all the time. But that's why we have rules, because they want to limit the effect of government to put the squeeze on them. But you go and help a minister set up their Facebook page, they're going to be less likely to want to regulate you. So why not just do what other companies do and register as a lobbyist?
Well, we'll certainly take that under advisement, sir. But again, we do not meet the threshold. If I just may, though, one thing just to be clear with committee members, with 23 million Canadians on Facebook, sir, 2 billion globally, but in Canada, 23 million, people use the service in many different ways. And that gives rise to, as we're discussing today, but in other realms, very novel public policy challenges. In fact, sir, most of my time is spent working with the broader ecosystem to deal with these novel challenges. You yourself have alluded to some of these institutions, but,
yes,
we deal with
California,
academics.
Facebook paid into PACs. I mean, you guys do public pressure. You do reach out. You are doing political work when you do your work. I think you should just register.
We are at time, so Mr. Chan, if you can just quickly answer that.
Yes. So I was just going to say we work with academics, NGOs, civil society, cultural organizations, indigenous groups, sir, chambers of commerce, small businesses. We build partnerships with people around the country. This is what it means to do public policy at Facebook, and I'm very proud of that. But thank you for that feedback, sir, and we certainly will take that under advisement.
Okay, so just we're going to get to another round. I'm just going to warn the committee that we have potential votes coming up, so we're watching that. So we'll start off the schedule again for the second hour. But we'll keep you informed of what's going to happen there. We'll try and get as many questions in as possible, but here we go for next round. So first up for the Liberal Party, Mr. Bayless, 7 minutes.
7 minutes, thank you. Thank you for being here, gentlemen. Appreciate it. One of the challenges you have with Facebook is such a global company that it has such a global reach. It's obviously got these great strengths, but also that you have challenges that come with that. One of them is jurisdictional challenges. So we have our laws, PIPEDA laws on privacy. Other countries, European Union has now put in a set of laws. The United States has laws. Some countries have no laws. I'm curious to how you're going to go about going forward. How are you going to, say, mesh all these different laws as they come on board and ensure that Facebook is meeting and respecting the different privacy laws of different jurisdictions?
Well, I think it's an important question, in part because it's important for us to make sure that we are giving a high level of privacy protection to everybody on Facebook, regardless of where they live, and two, because individual people have different preferences as well, and so we need to make sure that we give effect not just to national expectations, but also individual expectations. As was discussed before, Facebook is a company that's based in California, and so our primary regulatory relationship for Canadians are served by Facebook Inc. here in California, and our primary regulatory relationship is with the FTC. We also have an affiliate in Dublin that's regulated by the Irish Data Protection Commissioner.
Are you subject
that
to,
said,
I understand that, but are, like, as a Canadian, and I'm a Canadian using Facebook, and it's located, my data's in the United States, and I'm protected by United States law, but am I also not also protected by Canadian law?
That's an important question, and I mean, I think it's something I personally and we as a company spend a lot of time with the Canadian Privacy Commissioner. Over the course of our history, many of the privacy improvements that we've made have been born out of our discussions and investigations by the Privacy Commissioner in Canada. So I think our engagements in Canada, particularly around privacy regulation, are quite important.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you're engaged, but I'm just curious on a very specific question. As a Canadian, if I make these laws and yet my data and my contract per se sits with a company, Facebook, in the United States, am I protected by United States laws or Canadian laws or both, or what? Maybe Mr. Chan. Sorry, go ahead first.
I may not be the right person to answer that question. I mean, I think I would say that with regard to Facebook Inc.'s activities globally, we're regulated by the FTC, and I think the question of, the scope of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada's jurisdiction is a question for the Privacy Commissioner, I suspect.
But it's obviously your company, and I would assume you need to be aware of what laws you are or are not subject to. So I'm asking, are you, in your estimation, are you subject to these Canadian laws? Am I protected by these Canadian laws?
Go
ahead, Kevin. I'm sorry.
There's a bit of a lag, and we're kind of talking past each other.
Yes.
Certainly you're protected by PIPEDA. Let me just find a different way to explain what. I mean, we have had a long-standing relationship with the Privacy Commissioner of Canada. The Privacy Commissioner of Canada will investigate, as they are doing right now. They will investigate us for things that they feel are in that may come in conflict with PIPEDA, and we fully cooperate with the investigation, and we have, I think, implemented.
I do believe that you're trying to act in good faith, and I'm not questioning, and I really do see the challenge that Facebook and ourselves as our role as writers of laws. I'm just trying to understand if we write these laws and with the jurisdiction, and it's a tough question to answer, and I get that, and you're going to have this coming from a number of countries, obviously not just Canada or U.S. or Latin America, Africa, wherever. Are you going to be taking the laws of Canada and saying, okay, these are Canadians, and we better make sure that however we work are going to match Canadian laws? And that's a big challenge, I get that, but are you going to be doing that? Are you trying to do that?
I mean, absolutely, sir, and not just in the privacy realm. There are many other areas that we touch on in terms of how we operate or how users use our service, and we always want to be doing it in a way that is going to be consistent.
I'd like you don't have to give me the answer now, but I would like to hear back formally what level you are or are not subject to our Canadian privacy laws. And Mr. Chan, you touched on the other point I want to talk about, which does concern me tremendously, is we've seen bad actors use Facebook and other mediums like Twitter to interfere with democratic elections. In Canada, we have laws that control how much money can be spent to promote one party or another. I'm not attacking any particular country, but say a country that didn't want to follow these rules was paying someone or buying advertisement and breaking our laws, but they were doing it in this foreign country. What do we need to do as regulators, as writers of law, to make sure that that does not happen? Or even if they're not paid, let's say someone is just actively flooding your social network with information and impacting our democracy for nefarious reasons. How are you going to look at this challenge? It's a huge challenge. I want to understand what you're going to do to help address that.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I obviously only speak for how we think about it at Facebook. I don't want to make representations for other companies. But it is clear that, again, we were slow, much too slow to identify this new kind of threat back in the U.S. presidential. But when we did turn our mind to it, we started using, and I was getting at it a bit with an answer with Mr. Saini, but trying to look at automated signals to understand, from a political standpoint, those who are like foreign interference, how can we recognize that on the platform? And it turns out that it's people setting up fake accounts on Facebook and spreading misinformation. Now, as you know, on Facebook, we have an authentic identity policy. So the vast majority, right, the overwhelming of the 2+ billion people on Facebook, they actually behave a certain way because they're real people. They will do things in their personal time that we expect normal people to do. The fake accounts actually behave very differently. And so with AI, we're able to identify, and we're getting increasingly better at identifying these fake accounts and taking them down proactively. And so when you look at the subsequent elections after the U.S. Presidential, when you look at the French election and the German election, you look at the most recently the Italian election, we were able to identify tens of thousands of fake accounts and take them down proactively. And I'm pleased to say, although, again, our work is never done on...
One quick question before I run out of...
Sure, of course.
Just a quick question. Specifically on paid advertisement, and I understand how you're going to use it to find fake users and that. On paid advertisement, we control what can be done within Canada's borders on Canadian elections. If someone's buying an ad outside of our jurisdiction, but it's designed to impact our democracy, you don't need to answer it now, but I'd like to get you to think about that and think, how can we work together? What laws we need to put in place so that that does not happen?
Thank you for that, sir. We are doing a lot of thinking on that. We made some commitments for the U.S. midterms coming up, and happy to share that with you.
Thank you for that. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Kent.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Chan, I was pleased to hear you acknowledge today that perhaps Facebook, well, not perhaps, Facebook was too idealistic, I think you said, on how technology was used. And you committed to say that if Facebook finds abuse in the future, you will act fast, you will ban those privacy abusers. But some might say that's a little bit of closing the barn door after the horse has escaped, that it's an imperfect remedy that depending on the speed and your ability to detect abuse, much more potential abuse could be done if for an increasingly shorter period of time. How do you address that?
Are you talking about generally, sir?
Well, yeah. Well, to your point about if you find abuse, you'll ban it.
Yes.
But it's. I mean, you will only do that. In other words, you don't have preventive. Well, you do. You have discussed some preventive technologies, but the fact is there is still a barn door context to waiting until the abuse is detected.
Yes, I better understand the question now, sir. So again, we do have proactive measures in place that are getting increasingly better and sophisticated. Those are the AI tools I've talked about in terms of being able to proactively delete accounts, again, before mischief arrives. And again, when we look at subsequent elections, I think to the U.S. presidential one, for example, the German election, independent studies have shown that this phenomenon of misinformation and fake news was not a material concern in that election. But I think, if I may, to the broader point that you may be raising, I just want to assure you, to the best that I can, obviously, as an individual, that we in Canada take abuse on the platform very seriously. Obviously, the ones that would occur potentially during an election are the most serious. Exactly. I do have with me, Mr. Chair, if I may, I have a letter from the Commissioner of Canada Elections from 2015, or 2016, I guess, following the 2015 election, where he writes about his appreciation for the way in which Facebook Canada has engaged with his office proactively to ensure that there was no malfeasance during the last federal election. This is obviously something that that we have not discussed, but I'd be pleased, Mr. Chair, if I may circulate this letter so people can see that our good faith has been longstanding and we've been
we
doing
appreciate
proactive work.
that, and certainly in the context of 2015, the commissioner may well have had congratulations to appropriately deliver. After Cambridge Analytica and AIQ, as you've heard, the privacy commissioner has some very serious concerns about the urgency of addressing these problems between now and the next federal election, let alone a number of provincial elections. If I could turn now to some observers thought that Mr. Zuckerberg last week in his testimony dodged a couple of important questions, particularly with regard to who owns virtual reality, the virtual you, if you will. His response on a number of occasions was to note that the user owns all of the content. One uploads it, one can delete it at will, but doesn't answer the question of whether the advertising profile that Facebook builds up about an individual user can be deleted, and the fact that Mr. Zuckerberg didn't acknowledge that a user has no control over that data.
So if I might answer that question, yes, I think it's important, as I mentioned earlier, in our terms of service, the information that you put on Facebook is your information. You can delete it, you own it. With regard to the information that we use for advertising, I think it is equally important that we tell people what that information is. If we've made an assumption because you've liked the pages of several car manufacturers, we might assume that you're interested in cars, and that's an assumption that Facebook has made. But it's important for us to tell you about that, give you access to that information, and allow you to remove that if that's what you want to do. So again, with regard to that kind of information, I think it's also important that people have access to it and be in control. And then, of course, the ultimate control is that if people don't want us to have any information about them, they can remove their account. Obviously, as we've said today, we hope we provide great value for people in the lives of every Canadian who uses Facebook. We hope they won't do that, but we want to make sure that at each step of the way, people are in control of their information.
Well, thank you for that. There was one other, well, there were a number, but there was one other suggestion that Mr. Zuckerberg might have dodged a couple of questions with regards to the information, the data that Facebook holds on browsing activities. I guess he rebuffed the question. He rejected the question that Facebook does own users' browsing activities. And his answer was, browsing information is not part of the user's content. Since you didn't upload that information, but that may well be, some observers have said, many observers have said, and I tend to agree with them, that that's beside the point. So who does own the browsing information and browsing activity of a user?
Well, if I might just provide 1 minute of context on what we're talking about, if a website or an app developer wants to integrate Facebook technology, they have the ability to do that. And they would, for example, if they want to put the like button on their page, if you load the web page, your browser will send a request to Facebook servers to ask to receive the like button, and then we'll obviously record that we have that information. With regard to that information, we're using it for predominantly to provide the like button and make sure that if you hit the like button, then that is recorded in your profile. Also for technical purposes, to support advertising and in other ways. But I think with regard to that information as well, it's important that people have access to control it. So if they don't want that information to be used for advertising, they should be able to do that. And our practice is to delete and de-identify that information on a routine basis, independent of whether people exercise control.
So do you not agree that it might be appropriate to protect users who are small-eye ignorant of what might be happening with their browsing activity or clicking that access box, that perhaps you should have a very clear warning, a very concise one-sentence warning about the dangers of unintended use of this browsing activity? Or would you not do that because that might compromise and reduce your revenue potential with these third parties?
No, I think it's important for us to let people know how this technology works. We've done that in a number of ways over the years. I think it's clear that we need to do more of that. And so one of the things that we've announced this week is that we're going to be educating people specifically as a part of using the Facebook service about the fact that this technology exists and that we collect this information. We'll be educating people in other ways as well. And we actually just recently published a blog post on our website that provides more information about this practice, since I think following the hearings this past week, people were interested in understanding more. But so I think it certainly, you agree with your point that we need to communicate more about this.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Angus.
Well, thank you. When I was elected in 2004, I came out of the music business at a time when what was happening in Silicon Valley was turning the music industry upside down, and certainly the massive losses in recording revenues were noted. And there was a lot of pressure at that time here on the Hill to bring in legislation to regulate, to try and limit digital growth. And I was very much against that because I saw the potential, even though it was upending the music industry, it was upending, now it's upended newspapers, it's upended so many stable sources. Because of the potential for new ideas and for development. But what we've seen is that so many of these young startups have become monopolistic giants. The idea that there would be a whole series of competing, for example, platforms have disappeared. So my concern is, looking at it in 2018, Facebook has morphed from a place where you meet your old friends from high school into the single defining source of information for the vast majority of people. It is the news media for vast majority of people, whether it is false news, Russian troll bot news, or CTV. And so when Mr. Tarian came here the other day, he said that he needed the tools to be able to go in without permission and investigate or audit Facebook on privacy. But he also raised the larger issue that there's Competition Act issues. There's all series of effects that Facebook now has that has not really been looked at. So I would like to ask you, Mr. Chan, if a federal auditor for digital platforms was brought forward, who had the power to investigate these complaints, to ensure compliance, what would Facebook think of that?
Sir, are you referring to privacy, or are you referring
Well,
to the
Mr.
broader-
Tarian mentioned privacy, but obviously Facebook affects so much more than privacy. It affects the news, it affects information. Now it's affecting elections and whether or not elections can be undermined, as in the United States or in the Brexit vote, whether or not we need to have an independent auditor, because I don't see how we can regulate something as big as Facebook when you can move 1.5 billion users from jurisdiction to jurisdiction to move around laws. Would you support an auditor?
I think that already there are many different instruments that already exist. I think the Privacy Commissioner is investigating. I think that he's already very much seized with his existing abilities under mandate or under statute to understand and get to the bottom of what he has.
But I guess the question is, are you a utility now? You've moved from being a really cool space, but are you basically a public utility that everyone relies on?
Sure, if I may, we are a platform where there, as you point out, there are 23 million Canadians on the service, and we take that responsibility very seriously. I think that may be sort of, sir, the core of your concern is that whether or not we take that responsibility seriously, and we absolutely do. If I may, look at just one that you're alluding to, the news issue, which again I'm very much seized with working with the broader ecosystem. There are indeed 7 million Canadians every day who get at least some part of their news from Facebook. And we understand that's a very significant responsibility. We understand that we are a part of that news ecosystem.
Okay, so sorry, because I don't...
Yes, sir.
I don't want to get cut off with votes in the House. Sorry, I'm not trying to be rude here. But let's just zero in on that issue of news. The question of Myanmar, where Myanmar has become, Facebook was the sole source of news for a vast majority of people in Myanmar. And that The Guardian and international organizations said that the use and misuse of that platform definitely played a huge role in the horrific genocide that we're seeing in Myanmar and the rise of hate, because Facebook was the primary source of news. And the UN investigator, Yang Zi Lee, said that Facebook had become a beast in Myanmar. I mean, No one thought that when we started to exchange information that it could be taken over by haters and be used in such a manner, but it has been. So how do we prevent that atrocity from happening again?
Sir, so I, of course, would not want to speak to the specific details from another part of the world, but I can tell you, if I may, about our global approach to this. As I mentioned earlier, we do have community standards that apply globally. Hate speech, incitement to violence, terrorist content, those sorts of things I think we can all agree should not be on the service. And we do take them down proactively where we can with artificial intelligence, which, to be very clear, is not a panacea, and it's getting better, but we would not sort of say that this is going to be always perfect. We also do take down content that's reported to us, and I think we try to do this in all the languages in which we operate around the world.
Okay, I guess because the issue I see, and again, I'm on Facebook all the time. My wife says I'm married to it, your platform, for better or for worse. I always see anti-Muslim, pro-Russian, pro-Putin, pro-Assad comments. It's derailed comments. I mean, and I'm always trying to deal with this, but that's small potatoes compared to what's happened in Myanmar, and where Alan Davis, who's one of the people looking at that genocide, said things have gone so far in Myanmar right now. I don't know how Mark Zuckerberg can sleep. If Facebook has any conscience, they would be pouring a good percentage of their fortunes into reversing the chaos that they have created. You have an enormous power with your corporation, an enormous power. It's unprecedented in history to have Facebook identified as one of the key sources of such horrific killings. I would think that Facebook would be so outraged that you would be begging to come to committee, not being asked to come to committee, to say, we will make sure that this will never happen again. So where is that assurance?
Well, again, sir, I would just say respectfully, in Canada, I will circulate documents that show that before this became, before issues generally became public issues, we have long been at work with the right authorities to get things right. And so again, I could just point back to the letter I have here from the Commissioner of Canada Elections as congratulating us for our efforts.
I know, but we're talking about the power of one platform to cause horrific harm and death and an unprecedented massacre. I mean, that's an incredible power. My question is, as a corporate entity with Facebook's response that we've heard this morning, are you equipped to deal with this kind of power, given the potential for harm as well as potential for good?
Well, we understand very much where you're coming from, sir. We understand our responsibilities. I think, as I indicated in the opening statement earlier, we did not take a broad enough view about our responsibilities. It's not enough just to build tools that people can use. We have to ensure that they're not abused, to your point. I can only say that we have made big commitments to grow our safety team, going from 10,000 to 20,000 people in the next year, which is a significant undertaking for a company of a certain size in terms of FTEs, in terms of full-time employees. And we will continue to do more. So both on the technical side, which we spent some time talking about, but also on just having enough people on the ground to deal with all of these types of issues. I certainly, sir, would never want to say that we therefore can say that we are perfect and that we'll get it right tomorrow. But we are certainly on a journey, and I guess the point of my intervention was just to hopefully underscore that we have been on this journey for the last year or more now. We see much more work to be done. I want to assure you that we will do all that we can in Canada, but also elsewhere around the world, to ensure that that abuses do not happen.
Thank you, Mr. Angus and Mr. Chan. Just wanted to highlight for folks, we've gotten word that the votes aren't likely, so you don't need to be as urgent with your questions. Looks like we're going to get as many through as are on the list. So next up, we have Madame Fortier.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I was very proud to join Facebook a number of years ago, and I wanted to share information, but now with the things that have happened, I have doubts about what I should put up. We need to be able to restore trust with Canadians. And so I would like to know what you're doing now and what you're going to do in the future. I'm a mother of 3 children. I think of them and their future. They like just about everything. And not only in our professional, but also in our private lives, we have this filter. We deal with Facebook all the time, but we have to think about this. It's an incredible networking opportunity. I've kept contact with my family, with my acquaintances, and yet I still have this doubt, and I wanted to share that with you because not only people in my riding, but people across the country have that feeling. Now, I want to talk about application developers, and we talked about this a bit earlier. Could you share your policy on application developers? How many problems have you identified with your policy, and what have you done in those cases where there have been violations?
About your use of Facebook. I also use Facebook very frequently to communicate with my family and friends and find it valuable. But as we've said before, we have a very significant responsibility as well as people are using our service to make sure that they are able to use it in a safe and protected way. That's something that's been important for a long time, but that we're continuing to invest in. With regard to application developers, there are a couple of things I would say there. The first is that we have a series of restrictions on how they can use information from the platform. Those include they can't ask for information that they don't need to operate their app. They can't sell information that they receive. They can't use it for monetization or ad networks or those kinds of things. They have to delete the information if we or somebody else asks them to do so. As a part of the changes that we made in 2014, we introduced an upfront review process so that apps that wanted to get access to our platform and get those additional pieces of information would have to go through upfront review. And then we also do reactive review when we identify that there's a problem. And those steps can include removing somebody from the platform, investigating what they're doing.
Aujourd'hui que vous avez eu des contrevenants.
You said today that people have violated your policy. What do you do in those cases?
Of steps that we can take when people violate our policies. Those include terminating them from the platform. We can engage in informal engagements with them around improving if it's a minor violation of of some sort, and we can refer them to law enforcement or take legal action. I think one of the things that we've learned as a part of the events over the past several weeks, particularly, is that we need to be more aggressive in both our oversight and understanding of when these situations occur, and be more aggressive in taking enforcement action, including in collaboration with law enforcement where that's appropriate.
Madam, I just want to say, I mean, the other thing, though, that we've said very clearly is obviously we're going to go back and we're going to look at all the apps that were in play at the time. And if we do have evidence of malfeasance, we will ban the app from the platform and we will notify all affected users.
Est-ce que vous leur demandez de s'enregistrer?
Do you ask them to register with a physical address or to confirm their identity, these app developers? How do you ensure that they actually exist and that you can follow their activities?
That application process that app developers have to undertake, they have to provide some additional information about who they are, who's responsible for them. They have to connect to a Facebook account that we can identify with a real name. And so there are a number of steps that we take to identify them. One of the things that we've been doing across the platform and that we've been investing in is further verification to make sure that we understand who we're dealing with. And I think as a part of the efforts that we've announced to undertake further review of developers on the platform, and as Kevin said, looking back at app developers that would have had access to significant information before, as well as going forward, we want to make sure that we have appropriate oversight of not just what people are doing, but who's doing the information collection.
Vous avez, là, je vais aller sur la question.
I want to now deal with false accounts. You said how you prevent the setting up of these accounts, but given the situation that has arisen, what new measures have you taken to identify and confirm the identity of users? What processes or measures do you need to implement to make sure that these false accounts are removed from the platform?
So there are two things. I mean, one we've talked about already, but let me just briefly underscore. We are constantly changing and refining the way we identify fake accounts using machine learning. And so again, in subsequent elections to the U.S. presidential election, we did identify tens of thousands of fake accounts for each of these electoral moments, and we took them down proactively. And so again, for the German election, independent studies confirmed that this phenomenon of misinformation spread by fake accounts was not a driver in that election, and I think we feel that we are making progress on this. I would never want to make you think that we think we solved it. This is always constantly a game of steady improvement and technical improvement, and so we continue to do that. More recently, for the United States and in the lead up to the midterm congressionals, which is what I alluded to earlier, we have made commitments to roll out a second phase of sort of ad transparency. So as I mentioned, in View ads in Canada, this was the first country where we were testing this. We're going to bring that to the United States prior to the U.S. congressional election. But we're also going to have a special additional measures for political advertising, whether it be individuals or issue-based ads. And for those ads, we have a few measures that we will implement to try to ensure the authenticity of the individual that's running these ad accounts. And so, for example, making sure that they upload a government ID, making sure that we then confirm their address by mailing them a piece of mail with a special code on it. Those things we will launch first in advance of the midterm congressional election. And our intention, as we've announced, is to roll this out globally afterwards.
Thank you, Ms. Forte.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Next up for 5 minutes, Mr. Gord.
Merci.
Thank you. I think as a legislator, I have no doubt that Facebook is doing everything that it can to make sure that its platform works well. And of course, nuclear medicine is a new development and very helpful, though nuclear energy can be used to make bombs as well. Facebook is so big now. You've said that you're going to be bringing in more people, maybe 20,000 people, to make sure the platform is safeguarded. Things go so quickly that Facebook may be the biggest medium of communication on the planet. But we are afraid that you might lose control of your platform, even if you put in place all these measures you're talking about it, because there are people that are malicious that want to use your platform for their own nefarious purposes. Do you think you will, in the short term, be able to deal with this? Because as legislators, we can't allow you 5 or 10 years to deal with this. You have a huge challenge, a huge responsibility to carry this out. Will you move fast enough?
For the question, sir, we, for good and perhaps less good, we are known for moving quite fast to get on top of things. And I think you will see, and probably you've already seen in the last few weeks, that we are moving very fast to address many of the things that have been raised. And again, as I said earlier, this is not something that we have done just in the last month. I would like to characterize this more as a journey we've been on for the last year and a half to roll out a bunch of different things, a bunch of initiatives, whether they be on platform from a technical side, new products like View ads, but also partnerships with the broader ecosystem to try to prevent abuse on our platform. As I said earlier, and I think as our CEO has also said, I don't think we can ever give assurances that there won't be a bad actor who does try to abuse the platform. But we take our responsibility very seriously, and we're not waiting for authorities to decide what should be done. We take all the criticism very seriously. We take all the feedback very seriously, and we're putting in place, I hope you can appreciate, very tangible, concrete measures, both on platform and off, to address this very quickly.
Commentaire, Mr. Sherman?
Comment, Mr. Sherman?
What Mr. Chan said, I think that it's important for us to take steps expeditiously to address some of these challenges. I think the steps that we've announced with regard to platform over the past several weeks are the first of what I expect to be many efforts along these lines. And I think some of the most immediate things we can do in addition to looking backward are to restrict the availability of information as quickly as we can, impose oversight. I will say with regard to your broader comment that we have a broad responsibility. There are people who are going, we've been idealistic and wanted our products to be used for good. I think it's fair to say not everybody will use them for good. We have a responsibility to get on top of that. I think we also have a responsibility to you in Parliament, to the Government of Canada more generally, to work also with you on those problems and make sure that we're communicating with you about the steps we're taking. And so that's something that we're committed to doing expeditiously and in consultation with the Canadian government.
Donc, c'était un avion.
So this is a calm environment. Hopefully we won't have a storm. It's fine to have a little breeze, but when we have a hurricane, then it's pretty difficult for legislators to do anything to help you. Governments around the world won't be able to do anything if you lose control of your platform. So you have to succeed. You have a huge responsibility.
We certainly understand that.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Another 5 minutes for Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Thanks very much. Now, you've spoken about this being a breach of trust, and you've really highlighted the importance of building up the trust of your user base. That's fair, yeah? Okay, so is it also fair to say that in building up the trust of your users, it's incredibly important, perhaps most important, to be as open and honest as possible? You think that's fair? Yes?
I think that's fair.
Yes, sir. That's right.
Okay, so I asked about personal information being shared without consent previously, and what the most personal and most sensitive information might be that was shared without users' consent. Mr. Sherman, you gave an example of likes. You didn't mention private messages, though, and I have a notice in front of me from an individual who did not access This Is My Digital Life, but a friend did, and it indicates that for a small number of users, doesn't indicate what percentage or how many, that their posts, timeline, but also messages may have been shared. Can you comment on that?
We're still in the process of investigating and looking into the records that we have with regard to what was shared with This Is Your Digital Life. As I've said previously, we want to undertake a forensic audit to look at the information that's in Cambridge Analytica's possession and make sure we understand that. It is possible that private messages were shared in small amounts as a part of that. That's something that was allowed on the platform.
In your opinion, based on the evidence you've reviewed to date, do you think that private messages were shared without users' consent?
I believe it's possible, but I think it's something that we need to confirm.
Okay. So who's confirming that, and when are we going to get confirmation?
So we have engaged forensic auditors who would look at that question. We've been asked by the UK government, which is conducting its investigation, to wait until they're at a point where they're ready for us to do that. So we're cooperating with government investigations, but also want to do our own review. Okay, so I would like your undertaking then to provide this committee with a list and example of all kinds of personal information of individuals that would have been shared without those individuals' consent. We are still in the process of developing that information, but we will follow up.
You will follow up with us. Okay, that's great. Now, in the interest of being as open and honest with Canadians as possible, why haven't you mentioned local blocks today?
I'm sorry, can you explain what you mean?
So we had Chris Vickery attend before us earlier this week, who discussed 48 million additional users having their information shared in some improper fashion. Are you familiar with the context of that?
I am, yes.
Okay, so are you also familiar that Local Blocks was the company that was scraping user profiles?
I think we, as I mentioned before, the the problem of scraping is one that we deal with at Facebook and that any internet service deals with. And it's one of the things that we announced as a part of a series of changes that we're making this past week, that we're dealing with situations where public information that's just generally available on the internet is acquired in large scale. And this is sort of the practice that we refer to as scraping. We have technical measures that are in place to deal with that and to identify when that happens. So for example, looking at large scale automated efforts to collect information. That's a violation of our rules. We detect it many of the times when people try to engage in it, but it's very clear from that example that you've given that we need to do more. I think I referred earlier to some of the...
Isn't it also clear, though, that you should be... I mean, you've indicated the importance of building up the trust of your user base, and then the only reason you're talking about local blocks and 48 million users having their information scraped is because I asked you about it. It's just really curious to me when you've already indicated that being open and honest is so very important. So are you also looking at the idea of privacy by design, which is that privacy as a default setting? And if you're so concerned about scraping of user profiles, have you gone down this road of examining what privacy by default might look like to avoid scraping of user profiles?
Thank you for the question. Privacy by design is extraordinarily important at Facebook. We have a cross-functional privacy program that includes experts from around the company as we're building products to think about data collection and data use and how we can communicate with people and put them in control. One example of that is that several years back, we changed our defaults for sharing so that when you post something on Facebook as a new user, we'll ask you, do you want this information to be made public or do you want this information to be shared only with your friends? And people have the ability to change that at any time. We've also done privacy checkups to reconfirm that with people so that people can let us know. So by default, when you post on Facebook, information is shared with your friends. But we also want to give people the ability to share publicly. And unfortunately, one of the challenges is if you post something publicly on the internet, anyone can see it. And sometimes that includes people who are scraping.
So the only other undertaking that I would ask for is that when you have reconciled the number of applications that have improperly shared information without users' consents, and you've assessed the number of users who have been affected, that you also provide that information to this committee.
We will absolutely. We're in the process of looking not only at Cambridge Analytica, but at other situations as well. Once we understand the scope of that problem, we will certainly communicate that.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. The last couple of minutes to Mr. Kent.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Mr. Chan, Mr. Sherman, this follows on Mr. Saini's point earlier, just at the end of his questioning. But the Facebook posting by Russian disinformation maliciously attacking or trying to attack the credibility of Canadian forces serving in Latvia, the posting I'm looking at says about 10 months ago, and it is still up on that site, which I think is a fairly obvious posting of malicious material, that disinformation, certainly fake information that should be removed. But on the other side of the coin, there are any number of complaints from countries, human rights groups in countries like Iran and Russia and China and elsewhere around the world, where they complain that when the governments of those dictatorships, authoritarian governments, complain to Facebook about the human rights postings they make, they are too often removed. What's Facebook doing with regards to the balance of hateful disinformation and the repression of legitimate information in some of these far from democratic countries?
Thank you very much for the question, sir. I think with respect to the post you referred to, I mean, if it's appropriate for me to ask, if your office could follow up with me afterwards, then I would be happy to take a look at it and sort of see what may be the issue there. I think generally, sir, we, as you point out, and I think as others have pointed out, we operate obviously around the world. We do want to be sensitive to local laws and local cultures and customs in many respects as well. And I think you point out that your point is very much seizes kind of on the challenge of making sure that we are doing this in a way that that ensures that we have consistency, but also that we are sensitive to the realities in different countries. And so that's why we have a global set of community standards. We do recognize that those are not perfect. And as cases arise, and you can imagine that there are going to be on any given day, millions, if not billions, of posts in a day, they will give rise, as I mentioned to Mr. Angus on a different for a different question, gives rise to novel public policy issues. And every time we do encounter these novel cases, that is once again an opportunity for us to engage and try to understand what the right response will be. But I think in general, sir, we obviously have standards that are very clear about hate speech, about terrorist content, about pornography, those sorts of things, which I think we here obviously would not want to see those sorts of things on Facebook, and we take all these things very seriously.
I think the concern is about the suppression, the repression of legitimate human rights information at the direction of these questionable sovereign governments.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. And just to finish up, as chair of the committee, I think we've all appreciated the good parts of Facebook and connecting with loved ones and connecting with voters, etc., on a daily basis. I check Facebook regularly for my news, yet we task you with the deep responsibility of keeping Canadians' data safe. And I think this is one thing that's unique about this committee, that all parties are committed to do what we need to do to ensure that you keep Canadians' data safe. So thank you once again, Mr. Chan and Mr. Sherman, for your attendance today. We're adjourned.